Hey there, welcome back to the DFS Build NFL edition for week 4. I'm Kevin Roberts, ready to go over the main slate and hopefully help you win at DraftKings this week. No Taylor Smith this week, he's on vacation. It's just been a funky week for me dealing with sickness in the household and all that. So hopefully late at night with me basically whispering, we can point you in the right direction. If this video helps out in any way, please give it a like and also subscribe to the channel. Here we are on YouTube, the DFS Build. All right, let's get right into it for the main slate for Sunday. There's a lot to discuss and honestly a lot to like after a couple of up and down weeks here in the past couple of weeks. Hopefully we are in for some really nice shootouts. Last week was kind of gross in that regard. There were a couple of games. I know the Eagles Saints one was one that people thought was going to be really explosive, and it turned out that was not the case. So should be some good ones on the docket here. But what we're going to do is we're going to go look at every position, and I'm just going to point out, just highlight the options that are coming in with the best projection, highlight the guys that are getting the most ownership, and just giving you ideas what chalk is good to eat and what other positions can we entertain, or what other options at those positions can we entertain, and which ones do I like. So you don't have to go with my exact strategy or my specific picks if you don't want to, but I do hope that even if you don't want to play the players I want to play this week, that running through this does help you. I always find it to be a bit of a cathartic DFS experience for myself, and it's kind of why I started doing these videos in the first place. So hopefully just that alone is somewhat useful to you. All right, let's get into it. So at quarterback up top, we have best projections Jalen Hurts, which is obviously not too shocking considering the Buccaneers have not been very good against fantasy quarterbacks on the year. They've given up a couple big games, especially on the ground. Let's see, they are sixth against quarterbacks, sixth worst against quarterbacks. And obviously, they gave up that big 28-point fantasy outing to Jaden Daniels back in week 1. So Buccaneers look like a plenty viable matchup. He's the most expensive quarterback on the board, though, and I don't really want to pay all the way up at quarterback. But if you want to play Jalen Hurts at under 8% ownership, that's totally fine. He's got the best projection, perhaps the best ceiling and floor of anybody out there. So I got no problem with that. But honestly, not too far behind him is the guy I just mentioned, Jaden Daniels. He could be in a shootout with Arizona. A lot of people are going to be flocking to Kyler. I'll talk to him about him in a second. But Daniels is only 6.5K. In 3 weeks, he has 2 games of 28 plus fantasy points, and he can do a lot of damage with his legs. And last week on Monday Night Football against the Bengals, he actually surprisingly did a lot of damage through the air through his first pair of touchdowns against the Bengals. So suddenly now he's found the deep ball, and he ran one in too, so he can obviously do that. We know he has a really good floor just because of his rushing ability, and that obviously is part of his ceiling. So awesome price. The matchup is fine. The Cardinals on the year are not good against fantasy quarterbacks. They're definitely bottom 10. So that also is favorable. And the matchup is, or the game environment is also good. So love Jaden Daniels. Have no problem with him at all. The only issue with Jaden Daniels is that he's going to be chalky. Right now, he's coming in as the most owned quarterback. So for that reason, I would probably try to be splitting up my ownership a little bit. And there's honestly a lot of guys we can go to. So if we want to just get away from the ownership of Jaden Daniels, we can pay up a little bit more. You can obviously go pay up and get Hurts, like I was saying. You can pay up $500 more and get CJ Stroud and bank on him having his first true breakout game of the season. It has not happened yet. He's not had more than 19 fantasy points yet in any of the games. This really could be the week he does it, though. The Jaguars are the second worst team against fantasy quarterbacks on the year. So he is going to be without Tank Dell. I don't know. Nico Collins is fine after being on the injury report, and Stephon Diggs is still there. He's got Dalton Schultz. I think Joe Mixon might even be back. Let me just double check. Obviously, that would help him a little bit. Looks like Mixon, he is questionable, but he was back in practice in a limited capacity on Friday. So I don't think the Mixon thing really sways me one way or the other. But he still has Nico and Schultz and Diggs. So that's plenty. And obviously, the matchup is really, really good. Josh Allen just tore the Jags a new one, and they've just not really been stopping anybody that's good lately. So Stroud looks awesome. I have no problem with him. I think this is definitely the week where he gets it going. But like I said, you don't have to go get Stroud. He's going to be the least owned between him, Hurts, and Daniels and Kyler, though. So Stroud is very, very interesting for tournaments, and you can stack up the Texans pretty easily. Stephon Diggs is only 6.6K, and Nico is kind of expensive. But 7.2K for a guy with his ceiling, he's averaging 21 points per game on the year. Like, that's not that egregious, especially when you have guys like Devontae Adams out, Cooper Kupp out, Devontae Smith out, AJ Brown and Tebow possibly out. So like, you're losing like top end, like true studs who you feel really, really good about. So Nico and or Diggs with CJ Stroud is shaping up as one of my favorite GPP stacks for this week. But obviously, I don't mind eating the chalk with Kyler Murray either. I mean, I swear, like, NFL is not like NBA or MLB, where like fading the chalk all the time is, it's not always the right move because the chalk like hits a lot. So Kyler Murray, he's going to be about 14% owned, maybe more, honestly. He's a good price at 6.8K. He's been really good on the season. He's averaging just under 24 or 20 fantasy points per game. He honestly, that's a little bit misleading, I will say, because he has 2 games with about 15 fantasy points, and then that one big spike week against the Rams in week 2 of 28. So I think that's just a reminder of what he can get you. Obviously, his floor is a little bit lower than you would like for no real reason. But historically, he has a very good floor, honestly, and he has a nice ceiling too because he can run a lot, and obviously he has Marvin Harrison Jr. I will note that Trey McBride is out, so he has one less weapon to work with, but he does face the very worst defense against fantasy quarterbacks on the year. Washington Commanders have allowed the most points to the position, so Kyler looks awesome. So honestly, just all these guys at the top look really, really good. So I don't have a problem with them. I think just because of ownership, CJ Stroud stands out the most to me in tournaments. But if you want to eat the chalk with Daniels or Kyler, that's totally fine. I think I prefer Kyler just because he has the better matchup. But then you can also pay up for Stroud and Hurts, like I was saying, just because they're not going to be owned and they project as good or better than those guys. One interesting guy here in this range as far as projection goes is Trevor Lawrence. 5.7K is obviously very, very cheap. He could be in a shootout with Houston. The Texans have been a bottom 5 defense against fantasy quarterbacks on the year, but I mean, I guess eventually T-Law is going to get going. You can do it if you want to, and he's not carrying any ownership. So in theory, T-Law is a good tournament play. I just don't want to do it. It's like, why pay? Why risk that spot when you have so many good plays at quarterback just to get no ownership and get value? I don't know. That's not where I want to go for my value. And honestly, I hope that this projection ends up spiking his ownership because so far he's looked like a shell of who he was the past 2 years when he started, developing. He's maxed out at 13 fantasy points. That's his ceiling so far through 3 weeks. It hasn't been good, man. So I would still get a little bit of exposure just because this game environment looks really good. And obviously you can kind of mix it up. You could go T-Law with 1 or 2 of your Jaguars and then go run it back with Diggs or Nico or whatever and just fully stack that game because it has a nice game total and neither of these defenses are stopping passing games right now. So he's in play, but I am not personally super giddy to go play him. As far as other guys that I feel like I'm gravitating towards in that price range, Justin Fields still looks good at 5.5K. I think I prefer Fields over Lawrence just because, I mean, he has more proven rushing ability. He's getting more comfortable within the offense. Indianapolis is not a very scary team. Obviously, their run defense up until running into the Bears was not very good. And then even when they were playing with the lead against Chicago, they gave up 366 yards to Caleb Williams. So I don't know. I think Fields can have some success here. The only thing that's interesting is he's pushing 10% ownership. Don't know if I really buy that, especially with T-Law's projection and all these other dudes at quarterback to be interested in. Looking down here, I mean, Anthony Richardson, the matchup isn't very good, but the price is nice. We know Anthony Richardson has a very nice ceiling. So if he's not going to get owned, I think he's a little interesting because back in week 1, he had 27 fantasy points. He's really come down to earth last 2 weeks, 12 and 7 fantasy points. Worth noting, Pittsburgh has been very, very good defensively. And specifically, I think they've been crushing against quarterbacks. Yep, number 1. So that would be a very much flyer play as far as just a a dude we know can get like 30 fantasy points and nobody's playing him at 6.3K. I think it's a little interesting. But am I rushing to play Anthony Richardson? No. The other guy that I do want to note that I really am excited about is Caleb Williams. He finally flashed some semblance of a ceiling last week with 23 fantasy points, 2 touchdowns through the air, 363 yards, and 52 passing attempts. The Bears can't block in any fashion. They can't run the ball. He's 5.6K. He finally is starting to show his ability a little bit. And here he is against the Rams, who are the third worst defense against fantasy quarterbacks on the year. And he's getting Keenan Allen back. So he's got Keenan, he's got Rome Odunze, and he has his boy DJ Moore. So he has the full arsenal at his display. And here's the thing about Caleb so far. His matchups have not been very friendly. Houston in week 2, that should have gone a little bit better than it did, just because Houston hasn't been very good. But primetime game on the road, his offensive line has been garbage. I guess as a rookie, it's not that crazy just because he's been kind of slow to move it along here. But in week 1, the Titans defense was pretty good. And then they had been decent in the last couple weeks too. So that's not that shocking. He kind of came alive a little bit last week. So with his first truly, really soft matchup, I'm willing to roll the dice. And at 5.6K in this matchup, Caleb Williams is one of my favorite tournament plays. And the funny thing is he's not even that owned. 4% owned. I would much rather take him at $100 cheaper than Trevor Lawrence, just because he's got the better matchup, and I just think he has a better ceiling, and Trevor Lawrence might be broken. So I'm not going to say there's nobody else at quarterback to look at, but that's probably my quarterback player pool. I'm looking at Caleb, a dashing of Justin Fields, but most of my ownership is going to be prioritized at Kyler, Jaden, and Stroud. But the 4-pack mostly for me is Jaden, Stroud, Kyler, and Caleb. Those are the 4 quarterbacks I like the most, but hopefully I touch on a couple other guys that I do like too, so you can kind of consider them just because of value or projection or just general upside. All right, moving on to running back we go, which, by the way, as we go here, if you're building a lot of lineups, what you're going to want to do is, click exposures or set your exposures and build in rules like Taylor always talks about too. And that is up to you what you want to do. For just purposes of mapping out a lineup and what we like and what we want to do, I'm going to go in with Caleb as my quarterback for now because I really am high on him this week. I think he's going to smash, and I think you can gain a lot of you can gain a big edge right away if you can punt a quarterback and it hits. So I think there's a very good chance that happens. If you want to just eat the chalk with Kyler or Jaden, that's totally fine. See, it's not like they're that much more expensive. All right, to running back we go. Obviously, the top projection is Kyren Williams against the Bears. The Bears have been a bit of a hot mess. They are bottom 10 against running backs on the ground, so he looks like he's in a good spot. I mean, he has not been efficient, so it's a little bit scary to play Kyren Williams. The price is good for who he's been as far as, his floor games so far this year are 14 and 15 fantasy points. Pretty good floor games, if you ask me. And then last week, he just destroyed the 49ers at home, 31 fantasy points. He is not running that well. He just has nice volume, 18 carries in week 1, 24 carries last week. He's obviously a factor as a receiver out of the backfield too. So just the role is massive, and obviously still no Cooper Kupp, no Puka Nacua. So they are just going to keep leaning on him. And with a positive matchup, I don't have a problem with it. The only thing, like usual, that I have an issue with would be, is he going to be super chalky? And he is coming at 22%. So that might get my interest down just a bit, but I think everything looks good. There's nothing bad about Kyren except for the efficiency, but the matchup and the role kind of negate that. And he's not really expensive enough for a guy that just put up 31 fantasy points. So I do like Kyren quite a bit, and I have no problem getting to him. I'm not going to say if I'm building a single entry, like right now I'm kind of mapping out how I would build for a single entry tournament, right? I don't know right away if I have to lock Kyren Williams in, but he's absolutely my player pool and very high up in there. Breece Hall at 7.8K against the Denver Broncos. I feel like it's a little bit much. Denver has not been elite against running backs. They're definitely bottom 15, I think, maybe about bottom 15, bottom 20. But so it's kind of middle of the pack. And obviously the Jets want to get Breece Hall the ball quite a bit. He can be a factor out of the backfield, 4 catches in each of his first 3 games. Not enough carries, in my opinion. He hasn't had more than 16 carries yet in a single game, even though they're leading in the past 2 games, and obviously that has a lot to do with Braylon Allen's impact. And then when you have Aaron Rodgers, you kind of want to use him a little bit, right? So I think Breece Hall is a fine play, but he is carrying some ownership. Denver, I don't think it's like the softest matchup. And I kind of, if I'm paying almost 8K for my running back, I really want a massive role. So I'm not saying you can't play Breece Hall. I think he would feel more like a tournament play, and at almost 20% ownership, that feels not completely right to me. So I'm not going to be in on Breece personally. I'm not going to go all the way up at 7.8K with everything we know right now. Alvin Kamara is dinged up, so I'm not super excited to play him either at 7.6K. Once again, I'm not saying Breece and Kamara are bad plays. I'm just saying I don't want to play them because there's other really good options to turn to. So if you have a reason to go away from a guy, just trust your gut on that. But Kamara's not super owned, so I will note that. So far, Atlanta has been what? Not very fun. No, they're a top 5 defense against fantasy running backs on the year. So another reason to maybe not go for Elvin. But if Elvin's out, then we can start looking to, Jamal Williams, or I don't know if Kendra Miller is going to be activated or not. Let's see. He's not going to be back till week 5 if he does return. So we're looking at Jamal Williams. I don't know, at 4.4K. If Alvin Kamara is out, Jamal Williams is a fine punt, but the matchup is not good, so that'll probably end up being bad chalk. I think the most obvious play, once again, will be Jordan Mason. I have no problem with Jordan Mason. If he's going to be super chalk, like he's coming at 30%, you absolutely can entertain going away from that. That would have been the smart decision last week when he only had 10 fantasy points. But I mean, so far the Patriots' run defense has not been fun for running backs. I think they're like 5th or something. Let's see, against fantasy running backs on the year, maybe not quite 5th here. No, they've dipped a bit, but still, they're like in the top half of the league about. So I think it's fine because it's the 49ers and their system, and like the role Mason has. He has 19 plus carries in every game. Thing is, I would like him to have a bit more of a role as a receiver out of the backfield, and we just haven't seen that. So you kind of need him to get 100 yards and a touchdown to hit. So if you're not feeling it, and so far the best way to attack the Patriots has been through the air. I mean, that's what the Jets did last week. Rodgers just shredded them. Then you could talk yourself out of a chalky Jordan Mason. The only thing is, he's 6.7K. He has really good projection, and he's any like viable back in this Niners system is kind of matchup proof. So no issues really with eating the chalk unless you can find a guy that is cheaper or right around that price range that you like a lot more. For instance, if you were very confident in Bijan Robinson, you could pay $700 more for basically the same projection at half the ownership. I don't know if I really feel that because I feel like the Saints have been, also not a really fun team to run on. Top 10 against fantasy running backs. He's been dinged up this week. It looks like he's a full go. But it's just if a guy's not in like the ideal situation and they're expensive and they're not 100%, that might not be where you make that play. Well, I will say where I want to make the play would be Saquon at 8K. He's the most expensive running back on the slate, and his price is a big reason why he's only coming in with about 6.6 ownership going into week 4. And man, Devontae Smith is already out. AJ Brown also may not play. Let's see. Check the status of AJ Brown. Hamstring, look questionable. He was back in practice as a limited participant. I think if he's out, Saquon is a slam dunk for me, and I do wonder what that's going to do to ownership. But I kind of hope he's in, and then the ownership kind of stays steady. And just the fact that you have Breece there, and Kyren, and Kamara, and Bijan, and even JT, you have all these other guys who are absolutely viable in tournaments. If Saquon's going to get overlooked because of its price, I love Saquon this week. The matchup is awesome. The Buccaneers have given up the 3rd most fantasy points to running backs. He has been just a beast. 36 plus fantasy points in 2 of 3 weeks, 17 fantasy points in his would-be down week. Just huge role. He's catching passes out of the backfield, which is something people didn't expect him to do. He's getting major touches in the red zone, which people thought Jalen Hurts would get all those. And obviously he's showing his, breakneck speed in the open field and busting big plays. So even last week when the Eagles were just like completely stifled by the Saints, he still busted a huge touchdown and saved the day and crushed. So I love him once again at 8K, and if he's not going to be owned, I like him even more. Moving along, don't really want to pay 7.7K for JT against the Steelers. It's a tough matchup. I just don't really want to do it. He's not going to be owned, and he has a decent projection, and he is really good. So once again, if you want to go tournament route, you can play him. One guy that I really like at a value price is going to be Najee Harris, because Jaylen Warren is out, and we know the Steelers want to run the ball and control the game and just play good defense, and that's just what they've been doing this entire time. So truth be told, I don't really love Najee Harris as a player. I don't think he's not very explosive. I don't like trusting Arthur Smith offenses in general, but he kind of doesn't have a choice this time. Like, this guy's already getting 17 plus carries in each of his first 3 games. So we know he's going to get the ball. He has yet to score a touchdown though, which I just really think that's going to change this week for sure. So just as far as like just pure rushing load, way too cheap at 5.6K. Then you look at Jaylen Warren not being there. Again, way too cheap. He had 5 catches last week too, so it boosted his value a little bit, helped him get to 13 fantasy points. His only decent game so far this year. So I'm a little shocked that his ownership is even at 15%, but luckily 15% is not that bad. That's still half the ownership of Jordan Mason, and I kind of like Najee more than Jordan Mason, all things considered. By the way, the Colts run defense, it it stepped up last week against the Bears, but it was not good in the first 2 weeks. So just based off the way the Steelers want to attack and the fact that Warren's not there, and it's just going to be the Najee show, I don't know. Maybe I'll regret it, but I really like Najee at this 5.6 price in this matchup. I think he looks awesome. A couple of the guys just worth noting. Aaron Jones, revenge game against the Packers. I mean, the Packers defense has looked pretty good the last 2 weeks. I think the thing we're getting lost in context would be lost in translation, so to speak, would be the fact that they're getting a lot of turnovers and sacks. But in the first 2 games, they got just gashed against the run. They did kind of solve that last week, but I mean, Tony Pollard and Tyjae Spears, but revenge week. Aaron Jones back in Lambeau. The Vikings have looked really good. They're undefeated. The Packers' run defense wasn't good in the first 2 weeks. I can see Aaron Jones having a lot of success here. So he looks like a solid play at 6.4K. James Conner at 6.5K is another under the radar play. These guys both operate as pretty good pivots off of Jordan Mason if you kind of want to stay in that price range, but don't want to eat a 30% chalk guy. Aaron Jones catches passes and he's a factor in the red zone. He has a role. Same with James Conner. I feel like they're kind of more interesting plays. They don't have the same projection, but they're both cheaper. The projection isn't that far down, and they're like a third of the ownership. So I think they're interesting pivots for sure. But the Commanders are just bad all around. I said they were bad. They're dead last against quarterbacks. They are, and they're also dead last against wide receivers, but they're also like bottom 10 or at least very close to it against running backs. So yeah, James Conner looks good too. Trickling right along. Chuba Hubbard and Zach Moss are both really nice prices, 5.9, 5.7K. They look to be in decent spots. They're in the same game. They just have good roles right now. I mean, Hubbard went off last week with like 27 fantasy points. Is ridiculous. I don't really know if I expect that to happen again. I mean, had 30 fantasy points last week. I mean, he did nothing in the first 2 weeks and just exploded the second they changed to Andy Dalton. He's just like, Barry Sanders. It's just absurd. So if we're to believe that would end up continuing, Bengals haven't been that scary against the run, so Hubbard's totally in play at 5.7. Zach Moss had a really big role last week too. Chase Brown is starting to cut into that a little bit, and he's been the more explosive runner, but Zach Moss still had 17 total touches, and he had 20 fantasy points last week. So I would imagine they're still going to stick with Moss as the RB1. Between those two guys, I prefer Hubbard just because I think his role is more cemented. He does not have Chase Brown breathing down his neck. Let's see, as far as price and projection, ownership, does anybody else really stand out? I think the only other guys that I'm very interested in would be Carson Steele. The matchup is not that good against the Chargers. They're like top 10 against the run on the year. And here how they fare against fantasy running backs specifically. It's like right around 10. So they've been pretty good against running backs. But it's the Chiefs. They have a good offense. They can move the ball quite a bit. And he had opportunities to get a touchdown last week. Didn't happen. But the thing I like is he did get 2 targets. He had a catch. He had 17 rushes. And he was pretty efficient, 72 yards on those rushes. So if he can do something similar and then pop one into the end zone, he's going to easily pay off his 5.5K price tag. So he's in play. But based off the other guys we're talking about, I think Moss and Hubbard are just way safer. I don't think we have to get cute with Carson Steele necessarily. If you want somebody even less owned that could hit, I think he's definitely an option. And if we want to go all the way down, we go 4.1K for the Bears, Rashawn Johnson. There's a lot of talk about DeAndre Swift losing his touches in this offense. I mean, he should. DeAndre Swift has been bad. 6.5 fantasy points per game. Here are his yards per carry averages to the first 3 weeks. 3, 1.3, and 1.5. It's been tough out there. Let's just say that. So, people always make this argument like, oh, another guy comes in, he runs better. Well, that's because the defenses do plan against a certain starter, and then the change of pace guy comes in, and you don't really know if they're going to run or pass, and then they just get more open lanes sometimes. That might be what happened with Johnson, who had 8 carries for 30 yards. Obviously, just light years better than what Swift has been doing lately. And then he turned 5 targets into 4 catches for 32 yards. So a quick 10 fantasy points off 12 touches. And that has whispers of Johnson getting a more enhanced role, possibly completely stepping over Swift. I don't know. Maybe Khalil Herbert at 4.8K will be more of a factor too. I don't know. All the talk though is going towards Johnson. And at 4.1K, I absolutely do not mind that punt because he's not going to be owned whatsoever, at least for the moment. And he's super cheap, and he opens you up to do whatever else you want to do. I'm not doing that right now, though. Like I said, Barkley is my favorite guy when you look at role, ability, matchup, projection, ownership. Across the charts, he looks like my favorite running back. And then I want to pair him with a value, which if you don't mind eating chalk and you think Mason's going to get there 6.7K, that's fine. You can totally do that. I like him. I don't have a problem with him at all. Not telling you not to play Jordan Mason, but I'm also not locking into him like I did the past couple weeks. Okay. So he burned me pretty good with the 10 points last week. And I don't want recency bias to control what I'm doing, but I really, and I hope it doesn't come back to get me, but I really like Najee Harris this week. So I'm locking in good old Najee. And that's kind of where I'm at with my running backs here. Just as a quick recap, I like Kyron. No problem with that. You want to play these other studs in GPPs, go for it. Saquon's my favorite. Jordan Mason looks like okay chalk. I just think I want to get away from it a little bit. And then Najee, Moss, Hubbard are probably my favorites. And then if we get like news like Rashawn Johnson's for sure going to be like looking at a huge role at 4.1K, we can get a little bit more interested in that. All right, let's keep it going here. Wide receiver, boy, oh boy. Like I said, I like CJ Stroud for tournaments. I don't have him in my like single entry kind of mock build for you here, just because I'm trying to save a little bit of cash as I move along. But the Texans look awesome. So it's my favorite tournament stack of the week when you look at ownership and everything. The only thing is Stroud isn't going to be chalky because it's expensive and there's other similar guys who project very well that are cheaper, right? So he's interesting for tournaments because he's not going to be owned, not because people don't think he's going to be good. It's just they think there's going to be slightly better options and they can save some cash. So Nico is projected to smash. He has the best projection of the slate. I mean, he's projected so well that he's above Justin Jefferson and Rashee Rice and Jamar Chase and all these dudes. So I'm aligned with that line of thinking. It's a very, very good matchup. And, he was on the injury report this week, but he's been cleared. He's ready to go. And no Tank Dell. So just even more targets coming his way. So he looks awesome. No problem with getting to him at 7.2K. That seems like, honestly, it seems like pretty good chalk to me because he has 30-point upside and we don't really have to pay for it. Not to say 7K is not expensive in, relatively speaking for a slate, but when he can do what Jet can do and you're saving 1.5K to get there, that's something you want to go after. I think you can keep going with Rashee Rice if you want to. I mean, he just smashed last week. 32 fantasy points. His worst game of the year is 18 fantasy points. Chargers have not been a very soft defense, though, so I don't really want to mess around with the Chargers. Top 5 against fantasy wide receivers, just not my cup of tea. So I'm just personally not going to eat chalky, slightly expensive Rashee Rice. This isn't the week I'm going for him. AJ Brown, first game back from a hammy issue. Even if he does play, not super into that. With Devontae out, you absolutely can. The matchup is good. Hurts is stacking him with Hurts. It is appealing. There's nothing wrong with that. And it looks like probably for tournaments that will be a viable option because 7.8K AJ Brown is too cheap if he's 100%. But I don't know that he's 100%. I don't even know if he's playing yet. So it's just a reserve for GPPs. I'm not going to like lock in AJ Brown just yet. Justin Jefferson against Jair Alexander. By the way, worth noting, Jair is questionable for this game. He's a little bit banged up. I'm thinking he plays, but you just never know. I swear these guys keep missing this matchup. Either Jetta is out or Jair is out. It keeps happening. But Jair has done pretty darn well against Jefferson throughout his career. So that I'm not going to say he's going to shut him down here, but I will say the Packers defense has been better than they were last year. Their defensive coordinator actually sounds like he knows how to game plan and make adjustments. So they probably have a plan for Jefferson. And I don't know if I really want to pay 9K to find out if it's going to work. Okay. There's just a lot of really good options. Like when you can go get Nico and some of the other guys I'm going to discuss, I just don't think Jettis is necessary. The perk of that is he does have a good projection and he's not going to be owned. So if you want to play a completely unowned Justin Jefferson, there is that. You can do that. You got to keep an eye on the status of the 49ers guys. George Kittle is likely to be back. Looks like he's back. Does not have an injury designation, so he should be fine. The guy you need to keep an eye on will be Debo. He is listed as questionable. If Debo is out, I love Brandon Ayuk at 6.4K. He did kind of throw a temper tantrum in practice recently, so keep an eye on that. Maybe Jawan Jennings gets a bump at 5.6K. I kind of just hope Debo is in, and I just don't have to really like force the issue with 49ers guys. But if Debo's out, Ayuk looks great at 6.4. He's too good to like not be doing anything forever. In 3 games, he's averaging 7.6 fantasy points. Gross. But he's 6.4K, and it's a pass funnel defense. So if Debo's out, and even if Debo's in, Ayuk is in play. But I think he's a lot more appealing if Debo's out. So 7.7K Jamar Chase, totally fine. Don't have a problem with that. Right with Nico, love Diggs at 6.6K. No Tank Dell, so Diggs it feels a little bit too cheap. That Buccaneers-Eagles game could be a shootout, so both Chris Godwin and Mike Evans look really, really good. I think I'd have a lean towards Mike Evans as far as ceiling, but he does not project as well, but he also doesn't carry as much ownership. But Evans is my preferred play, even though he's a little bit more expensive. My favorite stud, though, maybe right up there with Nico, is going to be Marvin Harrison Jr. He obviously is just everybody was down on him after week 1. I just like stayed quiet and waited, man. I was just waiting to see what's going to happen. Don't want to make any, major declarations here after 1 week with a stud prospect. And then he had 32 fantasy points a week 2, and then 17 last week. Like I said, Commanders are dead last against quarterbacks and wide receivers, so he should feast. No Trey McBride, so I mean, who's getting the target share in this offense? It's going to be him. You absolutely can entertain the punts with like Michael Wilson and Greg Dortch, and maybe even the Cardinals tight end is going to step in for McBride. But Marvin Harrison Jr. looks awesome. Click. I'm clicking him for sure. I like him a lot, and he's not going to be nearly as owned as Nico. So it's kind of like if eating the Nico chalk is totally fine, and I like him a lot. But what I might end up doing is leveraging that a little bit with Marvin Harrison Jr., who's like the same price, and or getting exposure to other options in that offense like Dalton Schultz or Diggs at 6.6K. Okay, so other guys that are interesting. So Deontay Johnson, this is interesting because he is going to soak up a ton of ownership, pushing almost 27% ownership, which makes sense because Andy Dalton's presence has just made the Panthers offense suddenly like super viable. The only problem is he does have a little bit of a groin issue. He smashed last week, 29 fantasy points after being absolutely useless in the first 2 weeks of the year. But here he is, chalky, not quite 100%, and facing a just super, super desperate Bengals defense that honestly on the year has been top 10 against fantasy wide receivers. I think it might be bad chalk. I do. I think it might be bad chalk. No Adam Thielen, by the way. So if you want to do it, if you want to go Carolina Panthers, maybe take a shot on one of the other Panthers. You can play Deontay Johnson because he's cheap. He projects well, and he smashed last week. But he's not healthy. The matchup is not that good, and he's crazy chalk. So this is an opportunity for me to just like go somewhere else with this. And honestly, there's a lot of different ways you can go. Obviously, Terry McLaurin popped off last week, so that's one option. Drake London isn't that much more expensive, $600 more. He's somewhat in play. One guy that looks really, really good. It's just an amazing pivot. It's going to be Jacoby Myers because no Devontae Adams. So I really, really liked Jacoby Myers at 5.5K. I think he's a nice pivot. You can get back on the Rashid Shaheed deep ball train. Brian Thomas Jr. had 9 targets last week. We know he has explosive upside at 5.4K. So all these guys look interesting. T. Higgins at 5.9K. Jawan Jennings is the exact same price. He's not going to carry as much ownership with Debo possibly back. So yeah, I mean, these guys, there's a lot of value in that range. So I don't think we have to go play Deontay Johnson, even though he looks pretty good. Before we fill these final few spots here, I'm going to kick it over to defense and just slide in the best value, which is going to be where they're way down here. That was ridiculous. So I'll get back to wide receiver in a second. But honestly, I just don't like to mess around with defense that much. I don't want to pay for one. Every time I pay for defense, they just bottom out. If I go pay for the 49ers, they'll give up 30 points to the Patriots. It just happens every time. I don't know why, but it does. So I'm not even going to waste any time on defense. There's no point in me telling you how good a matchup is because the chalky defenses never work out. And it's completely unpredictable what defenses are going to hit or what not. All I know is the Jets or the Vikings are averaging 16 fantasy points per game. They have 13 plus fantasy points in each game. They have a very good pass rush. They have an opportunistic defense. They're not really giving up much of anything. They shut down the 49ers. They're 3-0. They're marching into Lambeau. Either the Packers are going to be without Jordan Love or he's going to play and perhaps he's rusty and the offense isn't that good this week. So as a Packers fan, it hurts me to say that, but 2.9K Minnesota defense looks pretty good. Pains me even more because I'm facing my wife in fantasy football this week and she just picked them up and is playing them against me. So anyways, that's going to open up a little bit of value for me right away. So I can kick it back over to wide receiver so I can finish up with some guys that I really, really like. I did mention Greg Dortch. I'll just finish up with one guy that I really, really like that's going to open up the value for me a little bit. Let me just do that. No. There we go. That guy. Lock him in. So obviously, Jacoby Myers as a pivot to Deontay Johnson is safer for sure. But Trey Tucker is 3.6K, and he blasted off to the moon last week. 7 catches, 9 targets, 96 yards, and a touchdown. That's 22 fantasy points. And where's the ownership, man? It's just like it's not really there. So if that holds, I mean, I think that it'll adjust and he'll be a little bit owned because Devontae's out, but I do think more of the ownership is going to flock to Jacoby and Brock Bowers, which I have no problem with that whatsoever. And then if we're just looking, I don't know exactly how I'm going to wrap it up just yet as far as like what values I'm actually going to dive into here. Let me just go down and see who else is really standing out. Nobody with a really promising projection or matchup that I have to get. I do know that I really like the Bears passing game. And since I have Caleb Williams here, I am going to go get my boy Adunze and lock him in. Then we can kind of decide what we want to do after that. We'll see where it gets us. Like I said, this is more of like a walkthrough as far as like how I would map it out if I was building a single entry or just what players I'm liking the most for the slate. Okay, so to tight end we go. The top projecting tight end is Brock Bowers naturally because there's no Devontae. That's 10 or so targets that are going to the rest of the Raiders offense. And he is an athletic beast who was really, really good in the first 2 weeks. And by the way, last week he was bad with only 7 fantasy points. For rookie tight end, that's not so bad. And obviously the tight end landscape this year is disgusting. So he looks really, really good. $100 cheaper, George Kittle looks really good as well. If Debo is out, I think Kittle is in play regardless because he has spike weeks all the time. But I would not like him as much if Debo's in. Let's see what else here. I think though, well, I mean, obviously Kelsey could finally get it going. How are the Chargers against tight ends on the year? Bottom 15. So I mean, they're not elite, and he knows them obviously very well. So this could easily be the week Kelsey finally gets it going. Don't think I'm really going to bet on that, but if you want to pay only 5.8K for who Kelsey can be, that does feel like a discount. Kyle Pitts against the Saints. The Saints have been bottom 5 against fantasy tight ends. That is very interesting at 4.8K for 4.8K for sure. I do like Kyle Pitts quite a bit. He's probably looking like one of my favorite options here at the moment. Dalton Schultz, like I said before, if you want to get some exposure to that Houston offense and you are not going to pay up for Nico, you can lock him in with no tank there, and that gives you can still go get Nico too, honestly, and I might end up doing that. We'll just look at everybody else first. I like Cole Kmet a little bit. I like him less because Keenan Allen is back. So Kmet was a smash last week, but it's like he had so many targets that it's so unlikely that he gets this big of a role. 11 targets, 10 catches, 97 yards, and a touchdown. They do face the Rams, who have been bottom 5 against tight ends. So there's that. So I still think he's playable, and he's cheap at 4.4K. But with Keenan back, it's just less exciting for me for sure. Elijah Higgins was the guy I mentioned earlier that is very, very interesting. 3.1K is a really nice punt against the Commanders. The Commanders have not been as terrible against tight ends. So you're taking a risk here. Elijah Higgins doesn't have a ton of experience, but if you want to go crazy and go pay up for, somebody like Justin Jefferson, you can definitely punt tight end completely. And by the way, tight end has been so bad that you might be able to get away with it. So you would have to maneuver your pricing a little bit, just because locking in Higgins leaves you with 8.5K, which isn't quite enough to get Jefferson, and kind of leaves you in no man's land. So maybe you could pay up a different spot, and you still get away with using Elijah Higgins and then go get somebody else. I don't really want to use Elijah Higgins necessarily. I'll have some exposure because he's so cheap. And if a tight end at 3.1K goes and gets like 15 to 20 fantasy points, that's going to break the slate. So you will want some exposure to him. But my favorite one is Kyle Pitts. He has a really good matchup. Dude needs to get going eventually. He's had I think he's had one good game or 2 good games. So week 1, 11 fantasy points, 1 good game, just not really a major focal point of the offense, but this is a pretty good spot. The Saints do have some good cover men, not so much at covering tight end. So at 4.8K, I think we can do that. We can lock him in. I feel pretty good about that. But as far as tight ends in general, Brock Bowers, if you want to pay all the way up, he's the second most expensive tight end, the best one in terms of projection and role right now. I think he looks really, really good. I just don't know if I want to put the funds in on him right now, especially since I have exposure tied into a Raider already with Trey Tucker. George Kittle looks really good if Debo is out. You can always try Travis Kelce. Goddard, it looks awesome if A.J. Brown is out. If A.J. Brown is in, I'm a little less interested in Goddard. And then Elijah Higgins at 3.1K is absolutely in play as an elite punt. So I'm going with Pitts here, and we can wrap it up at 6.8K. And kind of, you can go back and eat the Jordan Mason chalk if you'd like. You can come down and grab Brandon Ayuk, or you can go get somebody like Stephon Diggs, who is the person I'm going to grab. So, just in general, I just want to attack some of these spots where the matchups are really good. We're getting really good value. We're getting solid projection. When it's a non-quarterback player, we have a really good role, and we just have some semblance of upside. So we have a Caleb Rome Odunze stack. You can flip that however you want. Go work in Keenan. Go use Kmet at tight end if you want. Go pay up for DJ Moore. Rome Odunze popped off last week, and at 5.2K is a really good stack with Caleb, and both of these dudes are way too cheap still. And the matchup with the Rams is sublime. Saquon is a beast. He's been crushing. The matchup is awesome, and the role is awesome. And he's not owned. Najee Harris is going to be a little bit owned, but no Jaylen Warren. The matchup is pretty good. The role is good, and he's really cheap. Marvin Harrison Jr., the matchup is amazing. He's not that owned. He's not expensive enough for who he can be. He's an immediate leverage play on Nico Collins, who's going to be very chalky. Trey Tucker is an elite punt at 3.6K with no Devontae Williams there or Devontae Adams there. The ownership is going to flock to Brock Bowers and Jacoby Myers. They both look good. You can play both of them. I am going to just punt with Trey Tucker. Kyle Pitts at tight end looks awesome at 4.8K in terms of his personal ability and price and the matchup. He has not produced yet, and the projection isn't great, so he's a little bit risky. If you want to switch things up a little bit, you really just need to wait to see what happens. Like if AJ Brown's out, going $300 up to Dallas Goedert looks really, really good. If you don't want to play Stephon Diggs, you can punt somebody there and go pay up and go get Brock Bowers or Kittle or whoever else looks really good up top. Or like I said, punt with Elijah Higgins and then go get somebody else you really like in the flex. And then finally at the flex spot, I want some exposure to this Houston game for sure. So Stephon Diggs at 6.6 looks pretty darn good to me. And if you want to just pivot to Jordan Mason or Brandon Ayuk or whoever else you prefer, more power to you. And then obviously I just don't give a crap about defense. Minnesota looks good, 2.9K, it's worth a shot. So that's just an example of the way I would build things out and how I would kind of look at my players. And then if I want to go do 20 max or 150 max, then I just go back and look at all these players and just set my exposures. And I try to go a little bit over or a lot of it over the field as where's the ownership is currently projecting. So for example, if I really wanted to get Justin Jefferson, he's at 3%, maybe I'd go pop him in at like 20% of my lineups. Or if Nico Collins, if I ran the system and he's in like 80% of my lineups, maybe I'd drop that down to like 50. Just play with the ownerships until you have a pretty good feel as far as what you want to do. And then for single entry, you can use the system all you want, and then just lean on how you feel about certain players and kind of shrink your player pool till you come to the lineup that you feel good about. All right. That went a little bit longer than I expected, but hopefully that helps you out. And you can win some cash at DK this week. Thanks for watching. And if any of this did help you out, please give this video a like and also consider subscribing to the channel. Thanks for watching and good luck.